Elves are among the most enduring and fascinating figures in human mythology and folklore. Today, when we think of elves, we might imagine diminutive, green-clad helpers of Santa Claus, or the tall, elegant, and ethereal beings with pointed ears that populate modern fantasy literature, such as J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. However, the ancient conception of elves is far more complex, mysterious, and at times unsettling. These beings, rooted in ancient Germanic mythology, have been part of human culture for thousands of years, yet their true nature and origins remain shrouded in mystery. What were elves in their earliest forms, and how did they evolve into the figures we recognize today? Could there be a darker, more enigmatic secret behind these seemingly magical beings? Elves are a profoundly ancient concept, deeply embedded in the mythology and language of the Germanic peoples. The word elf itself is of Proto-Germanic origin, tracing back to the term albis, which places their conceptual beginnings at least 2,600 years ago. This term, in turn, derives from the Proto-Indo-European Rus, which also gives rise to names like Albion, the ancient name for Britain. The meaning of H12bos is often interpreted as white or bright, which may explain why Britain was referred to as the White Land, likely due to the iconic White Cliffs of Dover that greeted early Indo-European settlers. But why would elves be associated with whiteness or brightness? The earliest appearances of the word in Old English and Old High German suggest that elves were understood as supernatural beings, often linked to light and the sky. However, their nature was not always benevolent. In Old English medical texts, elves were sometimes associated with illness and misfortune. A condition known as water elf disease was identified, and some texts suggest that elves were believed to cause sickness through elf shot, a concept reminiscent of the ancient Greek belief in the arrows of Apollo, which could bring both plague and healing. Despite these darker associations, early evidence also suggests that elves were not universally seen as malevolent. Many Germanic names incorporate the element elf, such as Elfgar, Elfspear, Elfwine, Elf-friend, and Elfred, Elf-council. These names indicate that elves were considered powerful and potentially protective beings with whom people wished to associate themselves. This duality, elves as both bringers of harm and sources of power, reflects the complex and multifaceted nature of these ancient entities. In the early Germanic worldview, the distinction between elves and dwarves was not always clear. Both were supernatural beings associated with craftsmanship, magic, and the natural world. In some medieval sources, the terms elf and dwarf appear almost interchangeably, suggesting that the two were closely related or even overlapping categories. However, there were subtle differences in their characteristics and roles. Dwarves, from their earliest known conception, were typically depicted as small, subterranean beings, often associated with mining, metalworking, and the creation of magical artifacts. Elves, by contrast, were often described as human-sized or even larger, and they were more closely associated with the sky, light, and fertility. This distinction is reflected in the Old English word oaf, which originally referred to an elf child, but later came to mean a clumsy or foolish person, implying that elves were seen as large and imposing figures. J.R.R. Tolkien, the father of modern fantasy literature, drew heavily on these ancient distinctions in his portrayal of elves and dwarves. In Tolkien's Middle-earth, elves are tall, graceful, and immortal beings, deeply connected to nature and the stars, while dwarves are stout, hardy, and skilled craftsmen, dwelling in underground kingdoms. Tolkien's work has profoundly influenced modern perceptions of these beings, but his interpretations are rooted in the ancient myths and legends of the Germanic peoples. In Norse mythology, elves occupy a prominent place, often associated with light, fertility, and the sun. The Old Norse term alfar, elves, is closely linked to the concept of brightness and radiance. The sun itself is sometimes referred to as alfröðl, meaning elf disk or elf beam, suggesting a deep connection between elves and celestial light. The realm of the elves, Alfheimr, is described as a bright and beautiful place, inhabited by the Ljósalfar, light elves, who are said to be fairer than the sun. The god Freyr, one of the most important deities in Norse mythology, is closely associated with elves. Freyr, a god of fertility, peace, and prosperity, is said to dwell in Alfheimr, and he is often depicted as a beneficent figure who brings good harvests and favorable weather. Freyr's connection to elves underscores their role as bringers of fertility and abundance, as well as their association with the natural world. However, not all elves in Norse mythology are benevolent. The Dökkálfar, dark elves, or Svartalfar, black elves, are often conflated with dwarves and are said to dwell underground, in contrast to the light elves who inhabit the sky. These dark elves are associated with craftsmanship and magic, but are also seen as more sinister and mysterious. The duality between light and dark elves reflects the broader theme of balance and opposition in Norse mythology, where every force has its counterpart. One of the most intriguing aspects of elves is their connection to the afterlife and the spirits of the dead. In Norse mythology, the realm of Alfheimr is sometimes described as a place where the souls of the honored dead reside, safe from the destruction of Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle that will bring an end to the world. This association between elves and the afterlife suggests that elves may have been seen as ancestral spirits or guardians of the dead. This connection is further reinforced by the figure of Völundur, or Wayland the Smith, a legendary elf or dwarf who appears in various Germanic myths and legends. Völundur is a master craftsman, often associated with the creation of magical weapons and artifacts. In one famous tale, Völundur is captured by a human king who cripples him and forces him to work as a smith. Völundur eventually takes revenge by killing the king's sons and fashioning their skulls into drinking cups, before escaping on wings he has crafted. This story highlights the complex and often ambivalent nature of elves, who can be both beneficent and vengeful. The association between elves and the dead is not unique to Norse mythology. In Celtic folklore, the Aossi, people of the mounds, are often described as beautiful, otherworldly beings who inhabit ancient burial mounds and are believed to be the spirits of the ancestors. Similarly, in Germanic folklore, elves are sometimes depicted as the spirits of the dead, particularly those who died young or under tragic circumstances. These connections suggest that elves may have originally been seen as intermediaries between the living and the dead, guiding souls to the afterlife or protecting the living from malevolent spirits. With the advent of Christianity in Europe, the perception of elves underwent significant changes. In Christianized societies, elves were often demonized or reinterpreted as malevolent spirits. The Old English medical texts that associate elves with illness and elf-shot reflect this shift, as elves were increasingly seen as agents of harm rather than sources of power and protection. In medieval literature, elves are often depicted as seductive and dangerous beings, capable of luring humans into their otherworldly realms. Geoffrey Chaucer, in his Canterbury Tales, likens male elves to incubi, demonic beings who prey on sleeping women. Similarly, the 13th century South English legendary describes elves as outcast angels who dwell in the woods and fields, occasionally appearing in towns to cause mischief. Despite these negative portrayals, the older, more ambivalent view of elves persisted in some traditions. In Scandinavian folklore, for example, elves continued to be seen as both benevolent and malevolent beings, capable of bringing either good fortune or misfortune depending on how they were treated. Offerings of food and drink were often left for elves to ensure their favor, and certain places, such as ancient burial mounds or standing stones, were considered sacred to them. The modern conception of elves owes much to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, who drew extensively on ancient Germanic and Norse mythology to create his own version of these beings. In Tolkien's Middle-earth, elves are immortal, wise, and deeply connected to nature. They are skilled in magic, music, and craftsmanship, and they play a central role in the history and mythology of Middle-earth. Tolkien's elves are divided into several distinct groups, each with its own characteristics and history. The Noldor, for example, are known for their skill in crafting and their love of knowledge, while the Sindar are more closely associated with the natural world and the stars. Tolkien's portrayal of elves as noble, graceful, and otherworldly has had a profound influence on modern fantasy literature, shaping the way elves are depicted in countless books, films, and games. However, Tolkien's elves are not without their flaws. They are often portrayed as proud and aloof, and their immortality sets them apart from the mortal races, leading to a sense of melancholy and loss. This complexity reflects Tolkien's deep engagement with the ancient myths and legends that inspired his work, as well as his own philosophical and theological beliefs. Despite the many changes in the way elves have been perceived over the centuries, they remain one of the most enduring and enigmatic figures in human mythology. From their ancient origins as powerful, otherworldly beings associated with light, fertility, and the afterlife, to their modern incarnations as noble and graceful figures in fantasy literature, elves continue to captivate the human imagination. The mystery of elves lies in their duality. They are both benevolent and malevolent, both of this world and beyond it. They are associated with life and fertility, yet also with death and the afterlife. They are skilled craftsmen and powerful magicians, yet also capricious and unpredictable. This complexity makes elves a rich and endlessly fascinating subject, one that continues to inspire new interpretations and stories. As we delve deeper into the ancient myths and legends that gave rise to the concept of elves, we begin to uncover the deeper meanings and symbolism behind these enigmatic beings. Whether as ancestral spirits, guardians of the natural world, or otherworldly beings of light and darkness, elves remind us of the enduring power of myth and the human desire to connect with the mysterious and the unknown. The concept of elves is not unique to Germanic and Norse mythology. Similar beings appear in the mythologies of other cultures, suggesting that the idea of supernatural, otherworldly beings associated with nature, fertility, and the afterlife is a universal human theme. In Celtic mythology, the Eos E, people of the mounds, are often described as beautiful, immortal beings who inhabit ancient burial mounds and are believed to be the spirits of the ancestors. Like the elves of Germanic mythology, the Eos E are associated with both benevolence and malevolence, and they are often depicted as capricious and unpredictable. Offerings of food and drink are left for them to ensure their favor, and certain places, such as ancient stone circles or sacred groves, are considered their domain. In Greek mythology, the daimons are supernatural beings who occupy a middle ground between gods and mortals. Like elves, daimons are associated with specific places, such as rivers, forests, or mountains, and they are often seen as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. The daimons are not inherently good or evil, but they can be either helpful or harmful depending on how they are treated. In Hindu mythology, the devas and asuras are two classes of supernatural beings who are often in conflict with each other. The devas are associated with light, order, and the heavens, while the asuras are associated with darkness, chaos, and the underworld. This duality is reminiscent of the distinction between light elves and dark elves in Norse mythology, suggesting a common Indo-European origin for these concepts. The symbolism of elves is deeply intertwined with themes of light, fertility, and the cycle of life and death. In many mythologies, elves are associated with the sun, the sky, and the natural world, reflecting their role as bringers of light and life. The connection between elves and the sun is particularly strong in Norse mythology, where the sun is sometimes referred to as the elf disk or elf beam, and the realm of the elves is described as a bright and beautiful place. At the same time, elves are also associated with the cycle of life and death, particularly through their connection to the afterlife and the spirits of the dead. In Norse mythology, the realm of Alfheimr is sometimes described as a place where the souls of the honored dead reside, safe from the destruction of Ragnarok. This association between elves and the afterlife suggests that elves may have been seen as guardians or guides for the souls of the dead, helping them navigate the journey to the other world. The duality of elves as beings of both light and darkness, life and death, reflects the broader themes of balance and opposition that are central to many mythologies. Elves embody the idea that life and death, light and darkness, are interconnected and interdependent, and that one cannot exist without the other. In addition to their role in mythology, elves have also played a significant role in folklore and popular culture. In European folklore, elves are often depicted as mischievous or malevolent beings who inhabit the natural world, particularly forests, mountains, and bodies of water. They are sometimes described as small, human-like creatures with pointed ears and magical powers, and they are often associated with specific places, such as ancient trees, standing stones, or burial mounds. In Scandinavian folklore, elves are often associated with the Huldra folk, hidden people, who are said to live in hidden villages or underground realms. These beings are often depicted as beautiful and alluring, but also dangerous and capricious. They are known to kidnap humans, particularly children, and to lead travelers astray in the wilderness. Offerings of food and drink are often left for the Huldra folk to ensure their favor, and certain places, such as ancient burial mounds or standing stones, are considered sacred to them. In modern popular culture, elves have become a staple of fantasy literature, film, and gaming. From J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth to the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game, elves are often depicted as noble, graceful, and otherworldly beings with a deep connection to nature and magic. They are skilled in archery, magic, and craftsmanship, and they often play a central role in the stories and worlds they inhabit. However, modern portrayals of elves are not limited to the noble and graceful archetype established by Tolkien. In some works of fantasy, elves are depicted as more complex and morally ambiguous figures, reflecting the duality and complexity of their mythological origins. For example, in the Dragon Age video game series, elves are a marginalized and oppressed people, struggling to reclaim their lost heritage and identity. This portrayal reflects the darker, more ambivalent aspects of elves in mythology and folklore, and it adds depth and complexity to their character. The evolution of elves from their ancient mythological origins to their modern incarnations in fantasy literature and popular culture is a fascinating journey that reflects the changing values, beliefs, and imaginations of human societies over time. In their earliest forms, elves were powerful, otherworldly beings associated with light, fertility, and the afterlife. They were both benevolent and malevolent, capable of bringing either good fortune or misfortune depending on how they were treated. With the advent of Christianity, elves were often demonized or reinterpreted as malevolent spirits, reflecting the broader shift in European societies from pagan to Christian worldviews. However, the older, more ambivalent view of elves persisted in folklore, where they continued to be seen as both helpful and harmful, depending on the context. In modern fantasy literature, elves have been reimagined as noble, graceful, and otherworldly beings, deeply connected to nature and magic. This portrayal owes much to the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, who drew extensively on ancient Germanic and Norse mythology to create his own version of elves. However, modern portrayals of elves are not limited to the noble and graceful archetype established by Tolkien. In some works of fantasy, elves are depicted as more complex and morally ambiguous figures, reflecting the duality and complexity of their mythological origins. Elves are one of the most enduring and fascinating figures in human mythology and folklore. From their ancient origins as powerful, otherworldly beings associated with light, fertility, and the afterlife, to their modern incarnations as noble and graceful figures in fantasy literature, elves continue to captivate the human imagination. The mystery of elves lies in their duality. They are both benevolent and malevolent, both of this world and beyond it. They are associated with life and fertility, yet also with death and the afterlife. They are skilled craftsmen and powerful magicians, yet also capricious and unpredictable. This complexity makes elves a rich and endlessly fascinating subject, one that continues to inspire new interpretations and stories. As we delve deeper into the ancient myths and legends that gave rise to the concept of elves, we begin to uncover the deeper meanings and symbolism behind these enigmatic beings. Whether as ancestral spirits, guardians of the natural world, or otherworldly beings of light and darkness, elves remind us of the enduring power of myth and the human desire to connect with the mysterious and the unknown. In the end, the legacy of elves is a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and the human imagination. Across cultures and centuries, elves have evolved and adapted, yet they remain a powerful symbol of the mysterious and the magical, a reminder of the deep connections between the human world and the world of the supernatural. As long as humans continue to tell stories, elves will continue to inhabit our myths, our folklore, and our dreams.